35. The class structure of contemporary Soviet society. According to Marxism-Leninism, there are three social classes in a typical capitalist society. 1. The capitalist class or bourgeoisie, the members of which control the basic means of production and so are able to exploit, that is, to live partly or wholly on the labor of, the working class. 2. The petty bourgeoisie, the members of which control their means of production, predominantly in agriculture, and live primarily by their own work, without exploitation, and 3. The working class or proletariat, the members of which control no means of production and so are compelled to live by selling their labor power to the capitalists, who are exploited by the capitalist class. The capitalist class and the working class form the two basic classes of society and there is a conflict of interest between them. The preceding analysis has demonstrated that, on the basis of Marxism-Leninism, to which the present Soviet leaders continue to claim adherence, the contemporary Soviet Union has the class structure of a typical capitalist society. 36. The role of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union is a political party which is officially established as the leading and guiding force of Soviet society. The Communist Party has extended its guiding influence to all spheres of social life. The period of full-scale communist construction is characterized by a further enhancement of the role and importance of the Communist Party as the leading and guiding force of Soviet society. Program of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Moscow, 1961, p. 122-3. But, according to Marxism-Leninism, a political party is an organization which represents the political interests of a social class. During the period in which a socialist society existed in the Soviet Union, and prior to this period, the Communist Party was defined as an organization which represented the political interests of the working class. The party is the general staff of the proletariat. The party is the organized detachment of the working class. The party is the highest form of class organization of the proletariat. The party is an instrument of the dictatorship of the proletariat. J.V. Stalin, The Foundations of Leninism, in Works, Volume 6, Moscow, 1953, p. 179, 181, 186, 188-9. In 1961, however, the leaders of the CPSU declared that the party was no longer a political organization which represented the interests of the working class, but one which represented the interests of the entire people. Our Marxist-Leninist party, which arose as a party of the working class, has become the party of the entire people. N.S. Khrushchev, Report on the Program of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, 22nd. Congress CPSU, London, 1961, p. 90. But in a society which contains classes with antagonistic interests, and, as has been shown, the contemporary Soviet Union is such a society, it is impossible for a single political party to represent the interests of the entire people, and any claim that such a party does so must be dismissed as sheer demagogy. What class of Soviet society, therefore, has in reality its political interests represented by the CPSU? It is admitted by the leaders of the CPSU that the party no longer specifically represents the interests of the working class. Can it, perhaps, represent the interests of the petty bourgeoisie, which in the Soviet Union is composed principally of collective farmers and a relatively small number of self-employed professional, scientific and artistic workers? But, according to Marxism-Leninism, the petty bourgeoisie, as an intermediate class between the decisive classes in society, the working class and the capitalist class, is incapable of pursuing an independent political policy. It is capable only of following one or other of the two decisive classes, of vacillating between them. It is a truth long known to every Marxist that in every capitalist society the only decisive forces are the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, while all social elements occupying a position midway between these classes and coming within the economic category of the petty bourgeoisie inevitably vacillate between these decisive forces. V.I. Lenin, Valuable admissions by Pitirim Sorokin, in Selected Works, Volume 8, London, 1943, p. 145. Thus, on the basis of Marxism-Leninism, to which the present Soviet leaders continue to claim adherence, the CPSU is a political party which in fact represents the interests of the Soviet capitalist class. 37. The character of the Soviet state. According to Marxism-Leninism, a state is essentially a machinery of force by which one social class rules over the rest of the people. The state is an organ of class rule. A standing army and police are the chief instruments of state power. V.I. Lenin, The State and Revolution, in Selected Works, Volume 7, London, 1946, p. 9, 11. The Soviet state established in Russia by means of the Revolution of November 1917, was officially described as a machinery of force in the hands of the working class, as the dictatorship of the proletariat. The Soviets are the Russian form of the proletarian dictatorship. V.I. Lenin, The Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, in Selected Works, Volume 7, London, 1946, p. 145. In 1961, however, the leaders of the CPSU declared that the Soviet state was no longer a machinery of force by which the working class ruled over the rest of the people, was no longer the dictatorship of the proletariat, but had become an organ representing the interests of the entire people. In our country, for the first time in history, a state has taken shape which is not a dictatorship of any one class, but an instrument of society as a whole, of the entire people. The dictatorship of the proletariat is no longer necessary. N.S. Khrushchev, Report on the Program of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, 22nd. Congress CPSU, London, 1961, p. 57, 58. But, according to Marxism-Leninism, in a society which contains classes which antagonistic interests, and, as has been demonstrated, the contemporary Soviet Union is such a society, the state can only be the machinery of rule of the dominant social class, and any claim that, in such circumstances, the state represents the interests of the entire people, must be dismissed as mere demagogy. We cannot speak of pure democracy so long as different classes exist, we can only speak of class democracy. V.I. Lenin, The Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, in Selected Works, Volume 7, London, 1946, p. 129. The bourgeoisie finds it advantageous and necessary to conceal the bourgeois character of modern democracy from the people and to depict it as democracy in general, or as pure democracy. The bourgeoisie is obliged to be hypocritical and to describe the bourgeois democratic government as popular government, or democracy in general or pure democracy, when as a matter of fact it is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the dictatorship of the exploiters over the mass of the toilers. V.I. Lenin, Democracy and Dictatorship, in Ibid, p. 219, 220. What class of Soviet society, therefore, has in reality its machinery of rule in the Soviet state? It is admitted by the leaders of the CPSU that the state is no longer the machinery of rule of the working class, and it has been shown in the previous section that it cannot be the machinery of rule of the petty bourgeoisie. Thus, on the basis of Marxism-Leninism, the Soviet state can be the machinery of rule only of the new capitalist class. According to Lenin, however, monopoly capitalism, in which the economic life of society is dominated by a relatively small number of monopoly capitalists, inevitably leads into state monopoly capitalism, in which the state ceases to be the machinery of rule of the capitalist class as a whole and becomes that of the most powerful groups of monopoly capitalists, and in which the intervention of the state is extended into every facet of social life. In state monopoly capitalism, the monstrous oppression of the mass of the toilers by the state, which is becoming merged more and more with the all-powerful capitalist combines, is becoming ever more monstrous. V.I. Lenin, Preface to the First Edition of The State and Revolution, in Ibid, p. 5. Imperialism, The era of the transformation of monopoly capitalism into state monopoly capitalism has particularly witnessed an unprecedented strengthening of the state machine and an unprecedented growth of its bureaucratic and military apparatus, in connection with the increase in repressive measures against the proletariat. V.I. Lenin, The State and Revolution, in Ibid, p. 32. Clearly, in Marxist-Leninist terminology, capitalism in the Soviet Union is state monopoly capitalism, so that the state is the machinery of rule, not of the capitalist class as a whole, but of the most powerful monopoly capitalist groups. This was, in fact, admitted by Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin when, announcing the restoration of the industrial ministries which had been abolished under the Khrushchev regime, he described the change in character of the functions of the new ministries as compared with the old. The new ministries would rely on the trusts, firms and combines in their respective fields, and would hand over many operative functions to them. Further, a main task of the new ministries would be to render practical assistance to these trusts, firms and combines so as to improve their cost accounting, i.e., their profits. It may seem, at first glance, that a mere return to the former ministries is being suggested. To think so, however, means to disregard a number of new factors, and to make a mistake. The new ministries will work in entirely different conditions, under which the functions of the administrative management of industry are combined with a considerably greater application of cost accounting methods and economic incentives, and the economic rights and the initiative of enterprises are substantially extended. Within industries, a network of cost accounting amalgamations is being set up, and they will exercise direct management of their respective enterprises. The ministries will rely in their work on the cost accounting amalgamations, handing over many operative functions to them. Emphasis will be placed on rendering practical assistance to enterprises and amalgamations in the improvement of their work and in the consistent implementation of complete cost accounting. A.N. Kosygin, on improving industrial management, perfecting planning and enhancing economic incentives in industrial production, in Izvestia, News, September 28, 1965, in May. Sharp, edition, Planning, Profit and Incentives in the USSR, Volume 2, New York, 1966, p. 37-8. In the present-day Soviet Union, under the Brezhnev regime, the most powerful monopoly capitalist groups are those which dominate the Soviet state apparatus, are those of the dominant Russian nation involved in heavy industry. Furthermore, the Soviet state, the state of Soviet monopoly capital, is not a parliamentary democratic type of state such as, according to Marxist-Leninist analysis, exists in Britain at the present time. Within parliamentary democracy, the legal right exists for the formation of a political party aiming to transform the whole structure of society, and the legal right exists for that party to hold public meetings and demonstrations, to publish journals and leaflets, to contest elections, and so on. In the contemporary Soviet Union, such rights do not exist. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which, on the basis of Marxism-Leninism, represents, as has been shown, the political interests of Soviet monopoly capital, is the sole legal political party and functions, as has been said, as the leading and guiding force in Soviet society. On the basis of Marxism-Leninism, therefore, the contemporary Soviet state, despite its trappings of red flags, is a fascist-type state of a new type, in which the contemporary Communist Party functions essentially as did the fascist parties in Fascist Italy, Nazi Germany and Falangist Spain. The fascist-type character of the contemporary Soviet state is reflected not only in its official sponsorship of that typically fascist divisive maneuver, racism, discussed in Section 20, anti-Semitism, but also in the introduction of such monstrous forms of repression as the incarceration of dissidents in psychiatric hospitals. The voluminous evidence concerning this practice is accepted as valid by Amnesty International. On the basis of available documentary evidence, Amnesty International accepts as fact the general allegation that numerous Soviet citizens have been confined to psychiatric hospital as a direct result of their political or religious beliefs and with no medical justification. Amnesty International, Prisoners of Conscience in the USSR, Their Treatment and Conditions, London, 1975, p. 104. On October 25, 1975, El Humanite, Humanity, organ of the French Communist Party, condemned the practice, and on January 4, 1976, Marxism Today carried an article by John Gallen, former General Secretary of the British Communist Party, denouncing it in similar terms. Keesing's Contemporary Archives, Volume 22, 1976, p. 27553. Soviet psychiatrists who have refused to cooperate in the above practice have themselves been imprisoned. 7 Soviet psychiatrists have rebelled against a demand by the state that they collaborate in the imprisonment of dissidents in their hospitals, according to Amnesty International. 2 of the psychiatrists have already been imprisoned as a result. Amnesty International said yesterday it had received documents smuggled from Moscow confirming the continued political abuse of psychiatry in the Soviet Union and the persecution of Russians trying to expose that abuse. One of these documents is an open letter, signed by 43 workers, alleging 14 occasions since January 1977 in which workers, complaining against their foremen and managers, have been sent to psychiatric hospitals. Russian psychiatrists in revolt, in The Guardian, March 7, 1978, p. 7. In Soviet corrective labor colonies and prison, conditions are similar to those, which existed in fascist states. Even the official corrective labor code admits the use of starvation as a punishment for prisoners who do not observe the demands of the regime. The everyday material maintenance of convicted persons who observe the demands to the regime is carried out within the physiologically necessary limits. Soviet corrective labor legislation to a certain extent utilizes the daily material maintenance of prisoners as a means of gaining the goals established in Article 20 of the Fundamentals of Corrective Labor Legislation of the USSR and Union Republics. Ispravidalno Trudovoi Pravo, Corrective Labor Code, Moscow, 1971, p. 323-4, in Amnesty International, Ibid, p. 39. 38. Conclusion. The society existing in the Soviet Union since the economic reforms of 1965-66 has been analyzed on the basis of Marxism-Leninism, to which the Soviet leaders continue to claim adherence, and relying, with few exceptions, on official Soviet data. The conclusion is that this society is, in Marxist-Leninist terminology, a monopoly capitalist society, in which a new capitalist class exploits the working class. In this society the Communist Party functions as a fascist-type party within a fascist-type state. The conclusion is that the trappings of socialism merely conceal the real character of Soviet society. Carrying forward this analysis on the basis of Marxism-Leninism, the conclusion emerges that the overthrow of Soviet capitalism by the working class is inevitable. The overthrow of the yoke of capitalism will be achieved in all countries of the world. V.I. Lenin, the Second Congress of the Communist International, in Selected Works, Volume 10, London, 1946, p. 161. That this will require a new October Revolution. The dictatorship of the proletariat cannot arise as the result of the peaceful development of bourgeois society, it can arise only as the result of the smashing of the bourgeois state machine, the bourgeois army, the bourgeois bureaucratic apparatus, the bourgeois police. In other words, the law of violent proletarian revolution, the law of the smashing of the bourgeois state machine as a preliminary condition for such a revolution, is an inevitable law of the revolutionary movement in the imperialist countries of the world. J. V. Stalin, The Foundations of Leninism, in Works, Volume 6, Moscow, 1953, p. 119, 121. Which, in turn, is based on the necessity for a new party, a militant party, a revolutionary party, one bold enough to lead the proletariat in the struggle for power. Without such a party it is useless even to think of overthrowing imperialism, of achieving the dictatorship of the proletariat. J.V. Stalin, Ibid, p. 177.